Welcome. Yes, all right. We are so glad you're here tonight, the library. We have several books online, like 40 or so. I'm really pleased to have all of the space being used. My name is Kate Pickup, and I am fortunate to be on the staff here at the library doing computers and communications. And I have the pleasure tonight to introduce our Lisa of the Mount Historical Society, and Catherine Schmitt. She'll introduce Catherine for administrative purposes. The washroom is in the back, just straight back to the left. And she'll go outside. It's just to the left of the door. The door here. You can silence your phones. That would be great. And so coming up on Monday, the 29th, just this next Monday coming up, we have a closing art reception for the artists who are around here. We have a painter, Barbara Roberts, and she does paintings of Acadia, and they're upstairs as well. And then her husband, Frank Roberts, does these amazing pen and ink drawings of Rockefeller bridges and buildings. So please come by. It's around here. It'll be up in Monday the 29th is the last day. And then we'll have Anne Haynes and Joan Viano on the walls after that, and then Isaiah Rudman in our display case. And you may take a look at the display case at some point. We have these fantastic decoy duck flotilla. You may not be able to see them, but they're worth a gander. That. Okay, you're great.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, okay. Hi, my name is Lisa Murray. I'm the assistant director and the program coordinator. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. Assistant director and program coordinator at the MBI Historical Society. And thank you, Kate, and thank you, Southwest Harbor Public Library for working with us again this year for our Chebacco author series. We have been partnering with area libraries on this for this series for the past 3 or 4 years, and it's a series of free public programs inspired by the articles in our latest edition of our award-winning history journal, Chebacco. Each spring, the NVI Historical Society invites individuals and organizations and civic groups to contribute to Chebacco, which we've been publishing for over 22 years. Each edition explores a different theme. Last year was nourishment. Next year's will be music. And this year's, we explored the ongoing democratic journey on Mount Desert Island. And if you're wondering about the name, a Chebacco is a style of boat built in 18th century New England, and it's a vessel on which the island's first permanent European settlers, Abraham Soames and his family, arrived here in 1762. The MBI Historical Society holds over 3 dozen free programs year-round at area libraries, and coming up on Thursday, June 25th, our own Patrick Calloway will explore the complex legacy of Reverend pamphleteer Thomas Paine and Joseph Lyle. And on Friday, June 26th, Brooke Walensky-Lanford, who is the author of 2011's Paradise Lost, will discuss and sign her new book, A God-Shaped Nation, 500 Years of Religion in America, at Hidden Barn Books in Bar Harbor. So we have event flyers up here. Please grab one on your way out, or you can sign up for our email list as well. And if you enjoyed tonight's program and you're curious about Chebacco, I hope you'll consider becoming a member of the NVI Historical Society. Your support makes free public programming like this and Chebacco possible. So thank you very much. Tonight's speaker is Catherine Schmitt, a science communication specialist with Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park and author of Trees of Acadia, The Past, Present, and Future of Park Forest, which came out today. We have some copies up there. Catherine has been a contributing author and editor at Chebacco for over a decade, and her latest article on Western Mountain appears in this year's edition, which we have copies of up here. Tonight, Catherine will explore how parts of Mount Desert Island have been continuously forested for thousands of years, reflecting the unique landscape and millennia of human relations. From Wabanaki caretakers to European explorers, investors, and colonists who sought to make the forests their own. She'll trace how the pursuit of white pine that inspired the American Revolution reached the shores of Frenchman Bay, how oak and pitch pine helped fuel the emerging economy of a nation, and how concern for the fates of the forest inspired another revolutionary idea. People coming together to make decisions about the future of the landscape, preserving the forests that today remain vital to the pursuit of democracy. So please welcome me. Join me in welcoming me. What? Hold on.
She said the word.
Yeah. Okay, so welcome, Catherine Schmitt.
Thank you, Lisa. Can everybody hear me okay? We can? All right.
We go in the back, can you hear okay?
Sound is okay? Okay. The microphone's on my scarf and it's having a tendency to slip, so just wave a hand if my sound is fading a little bit. Thank you to the Mount Desert Island Historical Society, Southwest Harbor Public Library, and all of you for coming tonight. The sky is clearing, and still you chose to come and spend some time inside, so I do appreciate that. I shouldn't be surprised at the crowd because I am here to talk about trees. And I'm going to talk based on my article that's in this year's volume of Chebacco. So if you walk up Western Mountain, the title of the article is on Western Mountain. And if you walk up Western Mountain up to where the tree line starts to break apart, bedrock meets the sky. And from that exposed granite ridge, there's some broken, scraggly trees. You can look around at the trees that spread in all directions and understand that most of this island is forest. We tend to think of the shoreline, of the ocean, but when we think of the land cover, most of this island is trees. And the white pines are the tallest trees, and they rise above the rest of the canopy. Their needles are a brighter green. Their resinous cones will glitter in the sunlight. I was just noticing less than a week ago, the pines seem to have a lot of cones this year. Here for thousands upon thousands of years, this forest has been, is, and always has been Wabanaki homeland. Even as European explorers, investors, and colonists sought to make it their own. And it was trees like these white pines that helped inspire a revolution that made a United States of America possible. You soften your gaze from the summit, and the trees blend into one another, become a great green mantle, most of it protected within the boundaries of Acadia National Park. Quote, preserved, unimpaired for the enjoyment of present and future generations, unquote, end quote. Concern for the trees was the original inspiration for another revolutionary idea of people coming together and making decisions about the future of the landscape. Preserving the forests that I argue today remain vital to the pursuit of democracy. These revolutions are not unrelated. So the article draws upon my new book. It's from the chapter on pine in the book. And the theme of the issue of Chebacco gave me a chance to go a little farther down the path of freedom to try to make connections between the intact forests that are here, their special qualities, and their importance to civic democracy. And trees are indeed political. In the 1600s, European nations are at war. They're fighting over land and resources and power. Winning required a navy, and a navy needed ships. So France and England had already used up their big trees. And so they had to go beyond their own borders for masts and planking. Thus, Samuel de Champlain was sure to note upon reaching the shores of this island that the mountains were covered in pines, firs, and birches on their lower slopes. When France rewarded navigator Antoine de la Motte Cadillac with 25 square miles of unceded Wabanaki territory on the Ile de Montezert,
It was on the condition that he preserved timber fit for the building of vessels. So these early accounts are talking about trees. British colonists, meanwhile, they were required to save the biggest and tallest pines for their king. Still, many cut pines for their own use, ignoring or denying the centuries of Wabanaki stewardship that made their profit possible, that created the forest that they were drawing upon. So the colonists cut and cleared, and the empire struggled to control the mass trade that was so important to their winning. When Cadillac came here, surveying those forests that had long been shaped by cultural practices of the people of the Dawn, Cadillac reported back to his government that good masts maybe got here before he left to return home to France. So this island was contested territory, and the trees bore witness as Wabanaki people experienced fatal epidemics and violence. Not until 1762 did Massachusetts Governor Francis Bernard sail down east to inspect his grant of Mount Desert Island. His surveyors marked the location of pines and oaks. Bernard himself only noted that the hills were covered with woods of different sorts. He didn't bother to figure out what kind of trees they were. His surveyors made a little more detailed notes. That image on the right is from Baratius Mason, one of his surveyors, specifically mentions pines and oaks. Bernard also reported that squatters were making great havoc among the timber, particularly such part thereof as is by law reserved for the use of his majesty. People he described as strangers had cut and carried away most of the timber near shore, including, quote, sundry vessels from the westward, taking wood for staves and shingle bolts. So mid-1700s, we're still seeing competition and people sort of fighting over the trees. Bernard believed that his planned township, envisioned as a regular subdivision of more than 100 rectangular lots, would help to kind of quell the chaos and instill order and prevent what he described as a general devastation of the timber. Throughout the contested territory of the colonies, attempts by the British to reserve trees for their king met with woodland rebellion, backwoods anarchy, these are quotes. Settlers sought to either acquire land to circumvent the law, others just cut faster, some outright rioted, but on Mount Desert Island, they complained. Abraham Soames and others pleaded with Bernard, so they went to Bernard and they asked him to do something about the incrossings of the neighboring inhabitants. And those neighboring inhabitants were cutting hay in the meadows, hauling away hay that had been stacked to dry. We would further inform your excellency, Soames wrote, that vessel hands and others make a practice of coming to this island and cutting lumber, such as staves, shingles, and clapboards, and other lumber which must discourage future settlers. So no more, but we make bold to subscribe ourselves, your excellency's most humble petitioners. The agent, Bernard's agent, reported back to Bernard that Mr. Soames cultivates that bad spirit that prevails too much everywhere at this time. He tells the people that they have the best right to the hay on the island, and that the government is not likely to get a grant of the island. There has been great havoc made of your timber. Soames's bad spirit of resistance was shared by other colonists, who ultimately prevailed in the Revolutionary War, thanks in no part to the strength of their ships built from the continent's old growth pines. That's why there's a pine on some of the Revolutionary era flags. And Andrew Beats wrote a great sort of book focused on this. So Abraham Soames hosted the first town meeting in 1789 after the Revolution. And at those meetings, residents selected who would be surveyors of boards, cutters of staves, viewers of fences. And so the importance of sort of trees and wood and lumber is evident in this early, some of you, this may look familiar. This is the John Peters survey, which emphasizes the water powers of the island. So the only things that are really marked here are sawmills, some grain mills, and water power. And so town selectmen, they decided to preserve trees on land that they held in common. They monitored the production of staves and barrel hoops and boards and shingles and devised means of sharing and exchanging resources. There were already 10 sawmills on the island. Therese Miller is here in the audience today, and she's done extensive research on the sawmills of the island. So specific questions, I encourage you to talk to her. Beyond the island, demand for fuel and building material was increasing. So outside pressures, outside activities and desires for profit, putting pressure already on island inhabitants. And so those in distant centers of power had decided that the revolution was industrial, not agricultural, and forest clearing accelerated to serve those industries and those desires for profit. So wherever forests were being cleared arose the calls for preservation. It's a parallel track of destruction and demand for conservation. So calls for more careful husbandry arose wherever the axes had been. Now, most people thought it was up to, if you look at the dialogue at this time, most thought it was sort of up to individual property owners to protect trees on their land. A few writers did propose government action, but the government is not concerned with conserving resources at this time. And with the lumber industry and land speculation gaining momentum, forests were valued only for the board feet they contained. So participating in this industrial economy, whether out of a desire for profit or just for survival, settlers divided their properties again and again, fragmenting the forest and public access to it, as the trees of Mount Desert Island became boxes, barrels, and boards, and the sailing ships that carried them. So it's just some images of the Salem Town survey from 1808 that shows some of that division and some of those lot lines that carry forward to today. The manufacture has uniformly and constantly increased, boasted Maine Register author George Adams in 1855. Now there are at least 300 cargoes shipped to the West Indies and other ports annually. As land clearing approached its peak in the middle of the 1800s, more than half of the island's forests were lost to logging, fire, and development. In her guidebook to Mount Desert Island, Portland resident Clara Barnes Martin, so her first edition was in 1867, and in that edition, the first one, she said, except in one or two almost inaccessible valleys, the forest primeval is all gone, but huge stumps and scathed trunks show what the axe and the fires have done. The three western mountains and the twins, the bubbles, are covered with second growth, but the other summits are bleak and bare. So in 1876, a century after that white pine-inspired revolution, a column in the Ellsworth American declared, our once well-timbered country in its old growth is almost treeless, while the demands for stave lumber, box stuff, vessel wedges, and fuel for lime kilns are rapidly divesting it of its second growth. The chart on the screen shows forest cover through time from 1600 to the year 2000, and the different colored lines are just the different New England states, and then the black line in the middle is all of New England, and you just see how they all sort of reached this lowest point of forest cover in the mid to late 1800s. Even as population was increasing, then the forest came back. I think it's, because most of this island is forest, we have to make ourselves remember and imagine a time when only half or less of the island was forest. So, and the logging took place in the winter, right? Because that's when you could get the logs out on the ice. And so the people like Clara Barnes Martin, who were only coming here in the summer, they only saw the aftermath. They saw the stumps, they saw the mess, but they didn't see the activity of loggers or run into loggers. And most of these visitors lived in urbanizing areas where forests had long since been destroyed. So they saw the forest in a different way and recognized its value maybe in a way that people who are surrounded by forests all the time maybe didn't see them. And so in contrast, right, Mount Desert Island Forest, there were still some intact forests, making the prospect of so much logging all the more devastating. So you know I can't get through a talk with the Mount Desert Island Historical Society without bringing in my friends, the Chinook Plain Society. And these student naturalists, so they were among the first to document the forest decline on MDI, detailed in the botany reports of botany department leader Edward Rand. So in Rand's report, this is a cover of the very first one for the year of 1880, published, delivered to the society in 1881. And Rand included, so he had lists of plants, all the flowers they found. He described the places they went, the walks that they went on. And that very first report, he had a whole section on the woods. And he reported that though fine old trees could still be found in mountain valleys and in the ravines and more distant parts of the island, the landscape was vulnerable. Already the woods are falling beneath the axe to give place to flimsy barn-like hotels, Rand wrote. The rare wildflowers are disappearing. The ferns and mosses are torn from the spots they have so long adorned. The wood roads are becoming dusty highways. The shy birds of the wood are every year being driven farther and farther into the recesses of the island. It will not be many years before all the wildness of Mount Desert is gone forever. Is it possible to protect the natural beauty of the island in any way? And unlike others, right, who believed either private ownership was the solution or government intervention, Rand called for grassroots action. A company of interested parties could buy at a small cost the parts of the island less desirable for building purposes. They could obtain control of by purchase or arrangement with the proprietors. He indicated that Champlain Society captain, Charles Elliott, was working on a paper about how to make this happen at the same time, suggesting that the two discussed their concerns and ideas before 1881. So both Rand and Elliott had grown up spending their summers on the island and in the surrounding waters. And so they were really adamant that this park should be free for all. So that was 1880. They continued Rand's reports every year. He talked about different parts of the island, which places were experiencing destruction. And in my book, I kind of use his descriptions of where he was and overlay that with newspaper accounts and property deeds to try to figure out who was logging where and why. And so they're discussing all of this for throughout the 1880s. And then they went public in 1890. So by now, Elliott is working in the landscape architecture firm of Frederick Law Olmsted, and he turns to the pages of Garden and Forest, asking, can nothing be done to preserve for the use and enjoyment of the great unorganized body of the common people, some fine parts at least of this seaside wilderness of Maine? So Rand's statements about the woods and Elliott's plan of action to protect them reflected their own experiences of the forest, the joy and freedom of wandering the woods of Western Mountain, but also their formal education at Harvard and sort of the swirl of tree talk that surrounded them. Like in Cambridge and Boston. So Elliott knew that his great-grandfather had ensured preservation of Boston Common, the first public green space in America. And Eliot is seeing in Maine the same need that he's seeing in Massachusetts, where he was leading an effort to conserve public forests. At a conference in Boston, attended and supported by hundreds of citizens, Eliot reminded the crowd of their urgency and their agency. This worthy cause, protecting land, of ours must, under our democratic government, be fostered in its beginning at least by the individuals who may be interested in it. Someday, perhaps, this is Eliot, the state may create a commission and assume the charge of a large number of scattered spots to be held for the enjoyment of the people. But this day is not yet. Those of the people who feel and know the great value of such reservations must first prove their value by actual experiment. In other words, by opening many such places and managing them for the public good. So we got a role model. We can't wait for the government to do it. We can't expect everyone to do it individually. We have to come together and do it ourselves. So Rand by now is working as a lawyer, continuing to collect plants and pull together the flora of Mount Desert Island. And so he sought a more local audience. And he wrote a series of articles in the Mount Desert Herald in 1890. I confess I cannot but look with grave apprehension at the large sales of land made to various corporations for the purpose of speculation pure and simple. Large tracts of land in many parts of the island have been sold to land companies and others to enable them to advertise the wildest and most impracticable schemes imaginable. That some portions of Mount Desert must sooner or later be preserved and dedicated to public enjoyment will become more and more evident as the years go by. 10 years later, he's still saying the same thing. He called attention specifically to Western Mountain. By far the most interesting and most attractive of the mountains, where the owner of the eastern slope of the western peak began with a short-sighted policy that is somewhat remarkable since I believe he is a hotel keeper, Rand recognizing the connection between tourism and intact nature, to cut off his woodland to some extent. And at the same time, clearings were made in the so-called Tremont Woods and other parts of the mountain. The history of destruction is being newly written day by day. The hotel keeper was Henry Higgins Clark, owner of the Island House Inn, and from what I can tell, like every other business that was happening in Southwest Harbor, which I'm interested afterwards, like come talk to me, because given that this individual was involved in tourism, church, he was a deacon, he built the wharf, right? He built the steamboat wharf. He shipped ice. He shipped lumber. Was dealing fish. The cannery went in on the wharf. He made bricks. He organized the telegraph company. There's not a lot of information about Henry Higgins Clark. There's a surprising. This was the only photo I could find of him. Was him with a whole group in front of the Island House, and I had to really crop and zoom in. So, and any of you know, come talk to me about Henry Higgins Clark, because he also owned a lot of land, and he parceled it out to logging companies. You know, he had logging crews that were working from the Sluiceway Trail on Western Mountain, but then he also, a lot of people would just sell rights to logging rights, stumpage rights to people to cut the trees on their land. And so he was doing a lot of land buying and selling, as well as all of these other things. So that same winter after Rand called Clark out in the local newspaper, logging crews went to work on the eastern slopes of Western Mountain, hauling the timber to a new steam sawmill built by James Cushman of Ellsworth. And James had a 21-year-old son named Fred Cushman, who was supervising a crew of 50 men, 24 horses, cutting 2 million feet of spruce from the Heath family land on Western Mountain. Fred Cushman died a year later, and so he kind of took the family ambition with him. His father sold the mill to the Durham Lumber Company, and they hauled logs off the mountain for the next 3 years. So demand must have been high enough, or supplies, right, it had already been cut over multiple times. Or supplies were sparse enough because the Durans were going farther afield, like that wasn't enough land for them to run the mill. They had to buy trees from elsewhere, including some of the surrounding islands, but it wasn't enough to keep them out of debt or keep the mill running. This is an image from Seal Cove Stream from Southwest Harbor Library. So most of the sawmills in Acadia had shut down by the 1890s. Competition was emerging not only from the Midwest and the West, but a new kind of portable sawmill that could be located deeper in the woods and higher up the mountains. So when Deacon Clark sold 100 acres of the mountain lot, the very top of Western Mountain, in 1891, the summit was still described as being wholly wild land. But not by a decade later, when it was sold to the Seagrave Lumber Company of Cambridge, Massachusetts, they brought a portable sawmill up the mountain. Now, on the other side of the island, Luer DC of Goldsboro lamented the lack of visible public works and parks in Bar Harbor. Speaking at the town's centennial in 1896, he said, "There should be in this town and every town, similarly situated, some tracts of land adequate in size and beautiful in location, dedicated, consecrated to the public, where children may meet and play and imbibe lessons in liberty and democracy, where men and women of independent mind, unwilling to enjoy pleasures by sufferance, may stand or sit and listen to the symphonies of nature's feathered orchestras, view the mountains and lakes, and as a public right, watch the changing lights and shades that the public sunlight paints upon the surface of the public sea." Eliot, Rand, and DC asked their communities to decide together what the island's future would be. Would it include forests teeming with wildlife, mountains with views of the ocean, and the opportunity for anyone to find joy amid the trees? Upon the untimely death of young Charles Eliot in 1897, it was left to his father, Charles William Eliot, using the revolutionary model of the land trust that his son had helped to develop, work with both year-round and summer residents to create the Hancock County Trustees of Reservations. Trustees Treasurer George Stebbins recalled this time. "In the old days, the woods were safe because it cost too much to transport the logs to the sawmills, which were located at the outlets of ponds. But soon after the beginning of the 20th century, the portable gasoline sawmill came into general use, and that, together with a great increase in the price of lumber, made it profitable to cut any of the softwood growths on island. In acquiring these tracts for the reservations, thus saving the forests, we in some cases got ahead of the speculators and lumbermen by a few hours only." This is published, right? And this is in the Hancock County Trustees history in 1938. But we forget. So part of my purpose today and with the book is to remind you that the forests were the original inspiration for what became Acadian National Park. And by 1929, more than 400 people had contributed to what became the park, including the descendants of Henry Higgins Clark and individuals like Robert Kane, who had acquired the top of Western Mountain from the bankrupt Seagraves. Parcel by parcel, donation by donation, they stitched the forest, mountains, and shorelines back together into really more than the scattered spots that Eliot had dreamed of protecting. Okay, as Luer DC said in 1896, "We shall miss the lessons of this day as we treat it simply as an occasion for self-congratulation." So like the United States of America, Acadia has not lived up to its promise. Over time, the hundreds of people who supported the creation of the park had less and less of a voice in its management. Wabanaki communities remained excluded and prohibited from practicing their life ways and traditions. But with failure comes opportunity. So here's where I try to dig in a little bit to this connection between the forests and civic democracy today. So as commons, parks kind of they give us a focus for coming together. They give us reasons to come together and something to talk about because we all share an interest in this place, because it is that public place, the public sunlight on the public sea. So it's a topic, a subject that we can come together and discuss varying opinions and maybe encounter different perspectives. The forests of Mount Desert Island are more than a backdrop. They're also a physical reality that can be seen, touched, smelled, heard, even tasted. And so what is more important for civic participation than knowing the parts of the earth, the real land and water that is being represented? The truth of this terra firma is even more sort of profound and important today in an increasingly digital world. It's a quote from Terry Tempest Williams: that democracy depends on engagement, a first-hand accounting of what one sees, feels, and thinks. And on Western Mountain, it is possible to touch wild grass and so much more. So Acadia, like many other national parks, contains a fuller realm of life than most people encounter in their daily lives. So in this sense, conservation worked because it protected biodiversity. It protected old forests. The forests of Acadia are unfragmented. They are among the healthiest in the Northeast. That's some of the work that we do at Schoodic Institute has helped to show. The spruce and fir on Western Mountain are among the oldest forests in the East. And this makes them both rare and resilient. The chart on the left is showing the number of trees of a particular age on Western Mountain, with the oldest trees being in the mid-1700s. So there are 250, 300-year-old trees on Western Mountain, and the distribution, there's trees of all different ages. And that is an old forest. Some might call it old growth. And that is very rare in the Eastern United States. To experience an unimpaired landscape and the biological diversity that's found in national parks is inspiration. It helps you generate ideas which are needed to sustain democracy. Protected forests with their rare textures and scents and scenery and silence offer space to learn and practice the same skills that we need in democratic life: humility, patience, independence, curiosity, at a pace of freedom and sort of a scale that loosens the imagination. The writer Sarah Kinzior calls national parks daydream lands, where minds can bloom, where people can experience joy, and the hope that maybe you can experience it again. And this like turning towards the future extends beyond the individual to enhanced feelings of belonging, generosity, and community. A lot of psychology research has shown that experiences of being in beautiful, awe-inspiring landscapes, it makes you feel better yourself, but it makes you want to help other people feel better as well. And it makes you want to ensure that other people can experience the same joy that you just had. And so on Western Mountain, it's possible to feel insignificant in the shade of its immensity of the forest, but also worthy of the public sunlight that falls through the trees. So a lot of people that helps contribute to this story, and this is just a very small slice of the story, and their names are here. Thanks again to Southwest Harbor Public Library and the Mount Desert Island Historical Society, to all the organizations, including many that are publicly funded, who offered classes and workshops and conference and trainings that helped me learn about trees, And of course, all of the museums and archives and libraries, who gave me access to research. And thank all of you, for coming out tonight.
We'll take questions and Lisa will be passing you the microphone so everyone can hear the questions. Be great. We have a lot of online people, so if you have questions, go ahead.
Is working?
Yes. Does anybody have any questions?
At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned, before the European settlers came, that the Wabanakis had engaged in active stewardship of the forest, and I just wondered if, in your book, you went into what kind of activities they engaged in to take care of the forests.
Thank you for your question. I do a little bit. I think there's a lot more to be said. But certainly there's a lot of records of burning, for example, to maintain open grounds, to foster the growth of nuts and berries. If you combine Wabanaki knowledge with scientific knowledge, which again is some of the work that we're doing at Schmitt Institute, you can see that there used to be a lot more nut-bearing trees. There's recently some coring done of Witch Hole Pond, and you can look back through the sediment to look at pollen and macrofossils to understand what the forest looked like thousands of years ago. And there was a time it was a little bit warmer, but there was hazelnut and walnut and chestnut and all of these diverse trees growing in a small area, and that's not a coincidence. And I did talk to some of my Wabanaki colleagues, and their words are in the book, but I think there's a lot more for them to say about that story.
Do you have a favorite tree on the island?
The question was, do I have a favorite tree on the island? I've been expecting this question. Yes, whichever one I'm writing about at the time.
So your talk is mainly focused on that article, but you might want to plug your book. I just want to tell us more about the book as a larger.
Yes, thank you. So the release was a little bit like delayed. So the launch is next week. Next Wednesday, July 1st, at Jessup Memorial Library, I will be launching the book and talking about the book, and Sherman's will be there selling books. So you'll have to just come back. And I've got a bunch of talks this summer, and they're all going to be different. So you'll get a prize if you come to all of them. But I'm happy to sort of just say a little bit. So it is the past, present, and future of Park Forest. So there's a lot about the history of the forest, how it came to be, sort of post-glacial evolution and development of the forest, the kinds of trees that were here, Wabanaki relations with the forest, which are throughout. It's kind of the first part of the book, why they're so rare. So a lot of the things that are special and unique about the forests of Acadia. And then the middle section of the book is kind of the human relations history. So logging history of the island. And I really researched used some specific locations to kind of tell that story. And then kind of the last third is sort of the current state of the forest, and then projections for the future. And all of the people, the people on this slide, who I went out with in the field, who study the forest and take care of the forest. And it's a lot of their voices as well that are, yeah.
We have a question. We have a question online. It says, so how did you come to focus on more the Western Mountain versus the other sides of the park?
Yeah, so I focused on Western Mountain for this particular article in Chebacco. Because it was adapted from the chapter on white pine. So each chapter focuses on a specific species of tree and uses that tree to kind of talk about an aspect, a different aspect of the forest in general. And so I use the white pine chapter to talk about logging. So it's oak and white pine, and then actually apple. to talk about those human relations. And so so that chapter is set on Western Mountain because there's also the chronological story of the protection for the trees and the concern for the trees. And Western Mountain because of that article that I quoted from Rand, because the logging did start, it kind of shifted to the western, the harder to reach parts of the island. And so Western Mountain being so interior was kind of the last place where the loggers went, and the portable sawmills were moving up the valleys, whereas the eastern side became sort of more developed and populated. So I do go in the book, I do talk about the eastern side of the island and logging, but chose to focus again on these really specific locations to try to understand what was happening on the ground.
On my property, I have a lot of tall white pine trees, and some of them have gone completely dead, but they're still very tall and standing. And people have told me that they have very shallow roots and I should be nervous about them blowing over. Is that true? And why do they die?
I don't know. Are you sure that they're white pine and not red
The
pine?
very tall one.
Yes, because there are a lot of dead red pines that are standing around the island, and that was due to an insect called the red pine scale. That is the bark off of it.
No, not particularly.
Okay, so there's a lot of dead pines that have been dead from the red pine scale that kind of came through very quickly. You can still find red pine, there's still some around, actually Beach Mountain, Western Mountain has some, that are, the trees have a way of surviving these. So what killed the particular white pines, I don't know. White pines are affected by some blister rust and some needle diseases that, are the result of kind of fluctuating drought and then a lot of rain and then a lot of drought and then a lot of rain. So pines are being affected, but it's hard to tell without knowing the pines. And as for falling over, it depends, like, are they on water or on land? I mean, you don't see a lot of pines, right, falling. Spruce and fir definitely have shallow roots, and those are more prone to falling than pine.
Well, I'm on top of a quarry, so there's a lot of rock there under them.
Yeah.
So the roots are not probably that deep.
Is the tree leaning over your house?
I have taken down 4. It's nervous about it. It's a big job, expensive.
I'd have to pass it there.
Somebody had mentioned apple trees, but I don't know what she said.
I was wondering what the projection have for the forest on MDI as our climate continues to change.
Thank you. I don't have any projections, but the scientists that I work with do study this and have a lot of projections. And it's not clear. So one of the things that the scientists who I work with are kind of concerned about is that it's not just climate, right? So trees have dealt with changing climate. They've been around for hundreds and hundreds of millions of years, much longer than humans. They have dealt with climate changes in the past, maybe not as warming as rapidly as is happening. So the speed of change is a concern. But it's also just the interacting effects of all of the diseases and introduced insects that are also affecting trees at the same time. And so it's sort of these combined stressors. And if you think of each tree, like we just talked about with the white pine, every tree kind of has its unique stressors. And so the people who are looking at each tree and thinking, oh, that has this stressor, that has this stressor, that has this stressor, they start to just worry about there being forest at all. And some of the research about the health of park forests. So forests in Eastern National Parks from Maine to Virginia, all of them, except Acadia's forests, their forests are in a state of imminent decline or failure. Acadia, this was a study of over 50 park forests, and Acadia's were the only forests that were ranked as secure. And that's because the other forests were affected by invasive species, invasive plants, and particular shrubs and vines, and deer, overabundant deer. And so those Not that we're unfamiliar with that issue in this area, but those were the problems. And so that's what a lot of these, people whose names are on the screen, that's what they work to prevent. So, Acadia's plant vegetation management crew, we also just published a paper about their work for decades to keep invasive plants out of the park and how important it is to fund that team in those positions because they have kept the forest healthy. So it's more just wanting to keep forest as forest than we want into these tree species to be here. Like tree species are gonna move and shift around as they always have, and we might have different combinations of trees. But there's been this sort of collective decision, we want trees, we want forests, and so how do we keep that? And make conditions possible for trees, whatever kind they might be, to thrive here.
I think the next,
Yes.
speaking of the challenges to the trees, and you've identified many over the years, again, looking at future projections, the biggest challenge the island faces as a community is affordable housing. Can you address how you see affordable housing affecting the tree population, and are there places on the island affordable housing should definitely not go?
It's a great question, right? And I think we don't need more housing, we need more affordable housing. And I also think, so the Maine is, the island's about 77% forest, Maine is 89% forest, but that's a decline in recent years. And so the Northeast New England as a whole has been losing forest in the last decade. Every year we're losing forest. And if you think about both the intactness and health of the forests here and how important they are for all the reasons I just presented about, but also how much we need them to clean the air and clean the water and soak up carbon. We need all the forests that we have. And so there really should be a no net loss of forest policy. But that doesn't mean there's plenty of space for new affordable housing, and we need more affordable housing. We don't need more housing.
I'm like late, so please ignore the question if you covered it earlier. It's made me chuckle a bit, associate the word grassroots with Charles Eliot. And so even understanding the selections from your research and the language, which is fascinating. Were there any precedents in Maine for the kind of civic engagement at a significant level that you might compare? I mean, the issue of cars on the island came, of course, much later, but whether it's fisheries or anything else. Thanks.
Certainly. So I think maybe you missed the 1700s and talking about sort of early efforts by Abraham Soames and some of the community members here to control resources and keep things balanced. And the historian Richard Judd has written a lot in his book Second Nature about this early kind of rural agrarian culture of stewardship that did exist, as in particular in the Northeast. But then the sort of weight and power of industrialization, it was hard for it to continue, but it was here. And so I would recommend reading some of Richard Judd's work.
With your awareness of the history of the forest on NDI, do you foresee a future where fire is included in the management?
There's a chapter on fire in the book. Yeah, certainly. I mean, the fire has been a part of this forest for thousands and thousands of years, and there is certainly a role for fire. But fire, it's sort of a human decision. So fires are set by humans, whether accidentally or deliberately, and that has been the case. And that some of that early writing of Rand and Martin, there were a lot of fires. And actually, I didn't quote it here, but in the book of Charles William Eliot, talking about concern about fire was part of their concern for the forest, because the logging activity left a mess, like a lot of slash was just left behind. And then the logging activity would send sparks out. And so it was a very sort of fire prone industry. And then even if we think of 1947, there was pulpwood being cut on the island in 1947. And so those forests, the condition of the forest were very, very different. So it's always going to be a concern. And as we experience droughts, it's more of a concern. Yeah.
Don't you assume that there's a life expectancy for these trees? That at some point they become mature and beyond mature. I live in a neighborhood where there are lots of really, really tall trees. And,
Lucky you.
I mean, they're beautiful, but someday the hurricane's gonna come, weather's changing, bad weather
Yeah.
is coming, and are we prepared to deal with, to let the dead trees fall and stay where they are, as the park, I think, intends to do? Are we on private property, ready to do that? And, what is the longevity? The area where I live was pasture, Deacon, Clark's. So you could sort of calculate a certain number of years old that those trees are, and they can't live forever.
You're right. But a tree's life doesn't end when it falls, right? So trees live on, and as they decay, they become part of the forest. And so it's really having all of that material in the woods. To us, it seems like strange and messy because we're not used to it, because our forests are so young, because our forests haven't had time to develop the way that they want to develop if they're not cut over and over again. So part of it is just it looks a little different, and it can be unsettling. But for the forest, that's what the forest does. Now, you made some good points in thinking about storms, because there were some massive blowdowns in 2024. And if you think about a storm, 100-year storm happening every 10 years, happening every 5 years, that's like a rate and a pace that maybe the forest, isn't recoverable. The hurricane in 1938 that affected a lot of southern New England, there were major salvage operations after that hurricane because it blew down just so many trees. So that is certainly something to be thinking about, right? Like, how natural are the current processes in the forest? But I think you also kind of answered your own question about how do we decide, right, together, how to do that. In the park, I don't speak for the park, right? They have their management, but it depends on, your land. Is it public land? And so these are things that we can come together to sort of discuss, because if individual landowners act independently, regionally, maybe that's not helpful, but for people to get together to decide collectively what to do might be a good idea.
Okay, I've got a couple questions online, and think we'll end it after that. One is, was there ever a presence of Western, no, is that right? Is it chestnut, American chestnut?
Yes.
On the island, okay. Is it still present?
It may be, there's a big effort to return, so it's not present wild in the forest, but people may have brought it onto their properties. There's a lot of work going on to develop blight resistant strains of chestnut, and so it's perfectly all right for you to get one of those seedlings and plant a chestnut, but not in the park.
And apple trees. Who brought apple trees? You always, no.
Apple trees are fascinating. There's a chapter on apple in the book. So apple trees came with colonists. So they brought them from France and England. So there's some of those trees are still around. 200, 300-year-old apple trees are still around. And then a lot of their progeny. So there's then wild seedlings that came from those trees. So we do have a wild native crab apples that would have been here.
Okay, so we've got, I said one more, but I'm actually gonna ask, so what invasive
species of plants and bugs are affecting our native forests now?
There's a lot of them. One of the couple to be really concerned about is glossy buckthorn, which is present on the island, and that is the Acadia's vegetation management team spends like 80% of their time on that one species. So it's a short tree, it's a shrub, it likes it wet, it has glossy leaves with like deep veins in them and dark blackish berries and smooth gray bark. So I think I'll just say glossy buckthorn is one that we all should know.
How about black locust?
Black locust is of questionable invasive status.
Okay, go for it.
When you're looking at old growth forests on MDI and the surrounding islands, what would you say is the average size of a spruce in an old growth forest?
So an old tree is not necessarily a big tree.
Okay.
And a big tree is not necessarily an old tree. So you can't really judge a forest by the size of the trees. It's more the structure of the forest itself.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful one.